Welcome to the Relationships Inside Out podcast with Drs. Gregory Siebert and Kimberly Murray, licensed marriage and family therapists. Join them on this journey as they explore the ins and outs of relationships.
Welcome to Relationships Inside Out, where today we're going to talk about couples with chronic illness or relationships where one partner has chronic illness.
And this can be both the partner has chronic illness, but I wonder too if it would be helpful if we talked about like if a family member or a child, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. It adds additional strain, and it depends on the introduction of that chronic illness, right? So some couples might get together when one already knows that they have chronic illness, but then there's couples they've been together for several years, and then one of them develops a chronic illness, and then you get this loss of anticipated life, and you're dealing with a lot of that grief as well. So.
And it can be chronic illness from things that create physical disability or cognitive or mental disability, even emotional disability. When we look at like chronic depression, or personality disorders, or things that can develop in adulthood.
Fibromyalgia, maybe later down the road, right?
Even type 2 diabetes.
That's a big one.
Cancer, right?
Yeah.
With cancer, yes, some people it's treated and are quote unquote cured, right? There's risk of it coming back, coming out of remission, or for some people it's not curable. So we're in constant form of treatment.
And the way I look at this is there's a relationship dynamics, and now this is a stressor that is now added on those dynamics. So when I work with couples, we typically work on the processes to manage stress effectively so we can navigate together, which includes their individual capacity to manage stress, right? Because if they aren't able to do that, they bring it in the relationship. And I look at the illness as a stressor. So how are the couples going to manage together, which is unique because depending on what that chronic illness is doing in the partner that has that, it could limit their ability to be present or to be effective at managing or have that capacity to do so. And of course, some couples both have chronic illness. Now both are needing support, but might not be able to do that. It's a very, very tough situation.
And how do we work together as a team to effectively manage life as we go forward with this diagnosis?
Yeah. And it goes back to a basic communication. There has to be a communication about the needs. Partners aren't mind readers. And the reason why I say that is because the person or whoever has the chronic illness, whether it's both partners, they might not want help because they still have this sense of independence that they want. If they're able to do that, that's a hard thing to let go when you start losing that. And so they might not want that. So a partner might feel like they're helping and doing what they would want, but it might not be effective for your partner. So really communicating about what it is that your partner needs, and the partner or the one with the that needs that additional support needs to be very clear about that. The other partner who might provide support may not understand that, because there might be a time where you want to be independent, but you're not really communicating that, and the partner goes to help, and then you're mad, and then they stop doing it, and now you need support at a different time, and it could lead to problems as well.
Yeah. We can't guess what our partner needs. Oftentimes when we try to, we might get it wrong. Give your partner that clear roadmap. If you don't know what your partner needs and they're not saying it, ask. Get curious. What can I do to support you in this moment? What do you need for your body or your mind or whatever it might be?
Yeah. And then there's different types of support, right? Kind of like love language. I say there's support languages. We talked about this in the previous episode. Say I'll take an example of someone with type 2 diabetes. Maybe that partner takes on everything and starts cooking the diet and planning. Now that person doesn't have any control over their illness. It's on the partner. And that's kind of a double whammy in the sense of it could cause problems in the sense that the other one wants independence. And then here the other one's taken on all these tasks to cook and go grocery shopping and work on the nutrition. And now they have extra stress and potential caregiver burnout, which is a huge, huge, huge thing we need to talk about today in this context is caregiver burnout.
And before we jump into that, but dually, what if it also is the reverse of, okay, my partner has type 2 diabetes, and so there are dietary limitations that come with that.
Yeah.
What if I'm purposely indulging in foods that I know in front of my partner that I know are going to be hard for them to not also indulge in?
Yeah.
Am I tempting them, or am I respecting that? Hey, let's do this as a team. Let's try to support one another as a team through this process.
You actually see some gender differences here. So if in the context of type 2 diabetes or diabetes, if the female partner has diabetes, the male is less likely to kind of adhere and engage with the female partner. But if the male partner has diabetes, the female partner is more likely to
no part of that surprises
engage.
me.
heterosexual couples.
Literally no part of me is
But you bring
surprised
up a
by
good point, because that is something that needs to be communicated. A boundary. Is that partner okay with it? Right? There's couples that I've worked with where that partner's okay that they don't feel any pressure. Like they know, and partly, especially with the diabetes, they feel like complete shit, depending on what's happening and what they eat. So there's a lot of other incentives to not, but that needs to be a conversation. Like, what can I do? And that's another stressor on the partner if they do have to adapt their lifestyle too. And there's, inevitably going to have to in some extent, but especially in the context of the diet, right?
Even physical disability. Do I say we plan a vacation? Do we accommodate based on the disability? Do we still do things that person can't join in on? Are they okay with not joining in on it? Really having this open and clear communication, not just once, but repeatedly. Let's brainstorm together. Let's get curious together, right? That empty chair. Put the chronic illness in that chair. And how do we as a team, as a partnership, tackle that chair? How do we as a team tackle some of the challenges, some of the barriers that are going to come up with this chronic illness?
And with that, don't have every conversation about the illness.
Absolutely.
We need to talk about the things we love about each other and what we've done together and the things that we're very proud of, if able, right? And think about that, because we may not be going in the direction we expected, but we have a lot to show from where we're at potentially. And it is important to focus on those positives, because when it becomes all consumed by the illness, it's,
You bring up a good point, because sometimes too, when someone is diagnosed with a chronic illness or even a lifetime disability, the idea of someone always talking about or accommodating them is not what they want either. They don't want to feel like they're impacting other people or that their disability is the spotlight.
Yes.
Right. Because now we're highlighting that you are different than me.
Yeah.
And that doesn't always feel good either. So really trusting that in your partnership, trying to listen to your partner. How much do you want to talk about? How much you don't?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's tough on the person kind of going through that, right? If we're looking at a couple where only one of the partners has the illness, they feel like a burden. They feel like they're taken away from this image they had. They feel like they're letting their partner down. And that's tough. That's tough in the sense of being able to be there and be present when we're not focused on the illness in that capacity.
Feeling frustrated, let down. My mom had several chronic illnesses, but most primary was rheumatoid arthritis. And she had almost every major joint replaced at least once in her body. And the frustration that would wash over her of, I want to do that so bad. Her big thing was, I want to water skiing. I want to play tennis. There was no way her body was going to let her. And she would get so disappointed of, I just want to do that. So sometimes support also looks like joining them in that grief, acknowledging this really does suck. It really is painful that your body doesn't function the way you had expected. There's grief. There's anger. There is, why me? Why did this happen to me, to us? Right. And giving room for that is just as important as creating accommodations or whatever it might be.
Absolutely.
Because it's such a dynamic process.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also a lot of anxiety about the uncertainty of what to expect now. What does this mean for our life, our finances? There's a lot of unknowns when this comes into the relationship. So having communication around that, but also working together, whether you go to therapy by yourself or as a couple, to learn skills to help manage those emotions a little bit better so we can be more effective in the relationship.
To get that extra support so that we're not experiencing caregiver burnout. Right?
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
That comes from that being in that caregiver role for an extended period of time at some level of intensity. That intensity varies by person of how much we can tolerate. But this burnout comes from lack of respite, lack of taking breaks, lack of extra support. So what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, symptom wise, there's a lot of similarities with the depression piece, but you get a lot of exhaustion, physical, mental, some cynicism, sense of inadequacy. And then you get a lot of that, again, depression symptoms like this loss of interest in things, just fatigued and
irritability.
Even,
and I want to say this because it's important that caregivers hear this. You might be mad you're in this position to be a caregiver.
And you're allowed to be.
You might feel frustrated that, dang, like didn't expect this from my life. I didn't want to do this. That is not a judgment on the person with a chronic illness. There has to be a separation. And the reason for that is we don't want to blame the person because they obviously didn't choose it. And the caregiver is entitled to feel all the feels, including man, I'm pissed that this is the situation, or I'm tired.
Yeah. And you bring up a key there in the sense of like, I'm pissed about the situation and externalizing it. Because you do see, and I've seen where that partner will be complaining about it, and it automatically goes to the person who's experiencing the chronic illness of, I've upset them. I'm the reason why we're not doing well. And they blame themselves. So be careful of how that's vented and talked about and discussed. And maybe that's something you do when you tap into resources, because to help avoid caregiver burnout, or at least deal with it, is tap into your resources, your social resources, tap into the community resources for something that's related to whatever your partner's going through or you're going through.
Support groups,
activities.
There's often free ones too, by the way.
Yeah.
Like sometimes state or federal funding will provide free groups depending on the chronic illness.
Yeah. And those are huge, because that provides some respite, as you were talking about, especially if they're going with a group and maybe there's activities that they have for the day, like in the pool, right? I think about Parkinson's, and they do a lot of swimming or like yoga and dancing for those individuals. So things like that. And it also gives some break and some care. But during those breaks, this is the time to engage in self-care.
Yeah.
So it's important what you do at that time as well.
We're not just cleaning and doing all the things, right? We're giving our body rest and reprieve. That's true if we have a kiddo with a chronic illness. We can hire in respite. So getting a date night away, getting a vacation away. If we don't have other people that can come in, we can hire it in sometimes. Or if it's a parent, we always want to take good care of our parents, right? But we have a max. Every person has a max or a threshold of what they can take. Doesn't mean you're lacking in compassion. It doesn't mean you're a piece of shit. It doesn't mean anything other than you're a real human with a real threshold of tolerance that has been met. So getting that support in, because yes, of course, we still want good care for your parent, your partner, or your child, but you also need good care.
And here's my boundary plug for this episode.
Oh boy.
We need to know our own boundaries around what we're willing to take and not take in this context to protect our own self and sanity. You have a life to live too. It does not have to be consumed by this.
And even looking at like, is this an illness that we're going to be dealing with for a few years or a lifetime? Can I, like, treatment might make it better, right? But can I shoulder all the household responsibilities in that period? Can I not? If I can't, what do we do about that? Doesn't mean you have to separate or get divorced. Sometimes it's hiring in help or brainstorming ways to rearrange our environment to make it easier or more functional.
Yeah, finding balance. Like what can we each do that would provide a sense of community for each other, a sense of unified front in tackling this? Because again, it goes back to the processes and what we're able to do and not do, and how to that process as a couple, we tackle that stress, however it comes in, whether it comes in the form of chronic illness or something else. But
and if you have kids, say your partner has a chronic illness or a parent, I see parents sometimes try to hide it from their kids or like minimize it. I actually don't encourage that. I want you to talk about it. It teaches us to accept others, regardless of how their body is functioning, right? My mom used to talk about how with rheumatoid arthritis, your joints disintegrate, and her hands were crooked, and it's distinct. Like if you know someone with RA, you know what I'm talking about. And her joints, and she had scars up and down her body, and she felt so much shame and would almost tuck them away from my nephew, or would talk about like how it's embarrassing. She's wanting them to see. She had an elbow, especially the huge scar. And instead using that as a moment of like, let's learn about this. Let's learn how to love on grandma, even if she looks different. Let's learn how to talk about disability, how to love on someone with disability, how to not treat someone differently because of a chronic illness or disability, how to accommodate in a way that is kind, but not judgmental, and not, what's what I'm looking for, patronizing.
Yeah.
Right. Use it as an open dialogue to teach, to talk about it.
And normalize that, because this is, we're humans, we experience these things. They're going to happen for a lot of us. So it's not, I mean, you're not alone in this. And I think it goes back to the community piece and finding those communities where people are also struggling with this, and tap into what things they've done and unique techniques that they're doing and learning along their process and journey. And in the couple sense of things is, don't forget about the relationship in this. Find ways to still prioritize each other. Find ways to still love each other and show compassion.
Quality time, play, intimacy.
Yeah.
However possible, build them in.
Yeah. And that goes back to the boundary. Don't allow this illness to consume you if it doesn't, right? And there's going to be a lot of doctor's appointments. There's going to be a lot of this. If we can schedule work and doctor's appointments, things like that, we can schedule at least like an hour for a card game together. Something simple. It does not have to be this extravagant vacation. It's something where we appreciate each other.
Even like, I have family members right now who are also going through chronic illness, but scheduling lunch after every appointment. So then we go out to lunch, or when able, partner joins the person with the chronic illness in their appointments. So still using that as a point of quality time or point together if we can.
Yeah. And it all goes back to the communication. What do you need? How can we feel supported? What can we still do? What can you still tolerate? What's the capacity? And what do you need from me at times when I'm taking care of myself? So you don't feel alone. You don't feel like I'm abandoning you.
Good point. Because you need it. You need that respite.
Yeah.
It's I think of it like a dance, right? How do we do this dance well? And it's going to look different by person, by relationship. How do we honor and respect that person as just a person?
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw this out there too. This is a big ism for me, is that person first language. So it's not, say it's autism. It's not an autistic person.
Right.
It's a person with autism. Yeah. Keeping the disease as a small part of the person rather than the totality of the person.
Or an experience of the person. It's somebody who's experiencing.
But it's not the totality, right?
Yeah. And there are days that it's going to feel all consuming. There's going to be days that it feels like it is your whole life. But there'll be days where there's some light, some hope, where symptoms are maybe at bay for some reason, and using those times and capitalizing on them are going to be really important. And going, like we talked about a little bit earlier, finding ways to be able to work together to manage those, or on your own, manage those symptoms, the stress, the burnout, the depression, especially the caregiver depression is very common, higher rates in caregivers, partners compared to partners who don't have to play that role. The anxiety, again, just finding ways to cope and be able to manage that stress together and independently for when the tough days do come.
Okay. This is a tough one. We see it show up in therapy. I hope anyone who's going through any type of health issue, not just chronic illness, but any type of health issue, reach for your support, reach for therapy. You don't have to walk this journey alone. I tell people that on the daily. You don't have to walk this journey alone. You get to have support and help. So reach out, find someone who specializes in this area or specializes in your symptoms.
Yeah.
And get that support.
And tap into community. That's a huge one. There are resources. There are resources. And they're going to provide all different ways to cope, provide you respite care. And there's a lot. So don't forget about that. Strength
comes not in, people have to think of strength as being able to do it all myself and smile through it all. Strength comes in saying, I can't do it all myself and I need help.
Yeah, great point.
It's a much harder task to do.
Yeah.
Well, this has been Relationships Inside Out, where we talked about chronic illness in partners or family members. As always, if anyone has any questions or topic ideas for the future, please email us at relationshipsinsideout@gmail.com. But we thank you for joining and we look forward to chatting with you next time.
Thanks.